According to C.S. Lewis's Ransom trilogy, our home is Thulkandra, the silent planet. For it alone is outside the heaven, and no message comes from it. That is to say, no message came from our planet until Ransom was kidnapped and brought to Malacandra, or Venus. Venus? Sounds like a typo. Mars. I caught it. This is in draft form. I'll just say I presented that to some Talbot theologians and they didn't catch it. Neither did Matt Jensen. Okay, so at a certain point in this story, Ransom learns that Oyarsa, the angel of Mars, knows that God, or Maladil, would not give up the earth utterly to the bent one. And there are stories among us that he has taken strange counsel and dared terrible things, wrestling with the bent one in Thulkandra. But of this, we of Mars, know less than you. It is a thing we desire to look into. And shortly after this, Oyarsa asks Ransom, tell me more about this. Tell me about Thulkandra. Tell me about what Maladil has done. But we never get Ransom's answer. They're interrupted, and later the story tells us they spent the whole afternoon talking, and we're not given the answer. So we never get to overhear this conversation between Ransom and Oyarsa explaining what Maladil did in Thulkandra, the silent planet. In correspondence, Sister Penelope, this lady, this nun who would write to C.S. Lewis, she asks him, could you not, for believers only, perhaps as a theology article, write the scene where Ransom tells Oyarsa about the incarnation? Oh, please. Jack's response, I don't think even for believers only I could describe Ransom's revelation to Oyarsa. The fact that you want me to really proves how well advised I was merely to suggest it. And what follows? I'm going to attempt to sketch a rough outline of what C.S. Lewis dared not do. A rough outline of Ransom's revelation. It's fun to do things like that. C.S. Lewis thought this wasn't a good idea, so I'm going to do it. No, I just skipped 8 pages where I survey the role of the atonement throughout C.S. Lewis's thought. Because you're familiar with what happens in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Maybe you've read that one chapter in Mere Christianity, and you think, okay, that's his view. As it turns out, he's talking about the atonement all throughout his books, in snippets, paragraphs, and chapters. Each time he's doing something different, so he's an immensely varied, creative theologian who's appropriating people from all over the history of the doctrine. That's not important for this lecture, except to say, hey, he's a really creative theologian doing lots of things with this doctrine, so it shouldn't surprise you that he would go and do something incredibly creative in the Space Trilogy. So I'm just kind of setting up theological precedent for this argument, trying to make myself appear to be less of a nut than I am. Okay, so in the Ransom Trilogy, we find the confluence of 2 of C.S. Lewis's most treasured topics, Christ's atonement and cosmology. Concerning cosmology, Lewis sought to challenge modern cosmology and offer an alternative view of the universe. In short, he sought to rehabilitate the ancient and medieval view of the cosmos within a modern heliocentric model. So yeah, we go around the sun, but who cares? The medievals and ancients were still right about most things. That's the short version. Now, to properly appreciate Lewis's vision, we'll break it down into 3 parts, considering the Christus Victor background for the view. That's the emphasis is all on Christ defeating Satan. The cosmology proper, the view of the cosmos and how it's ordered, and C.S. Lewis's cosmological theory of the atonement, which will wrap things up. So the Christus Victor background. Lewis adopts a Christus Victor understanding of the atonement, such as we saw in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, to ground his thesis. Elwyn Ransom is, after all, a ransom. The kidnapped human sacrifice offered to the natives of Mars, the price paid by the evil men to appease the evil they feared and gain the benefits they sought. Behind this, of course, is a much deeper and more evil logic. The conflict between the bent one and the purposes of Maladil, partly from Malacandra, but more generally for the cosmos as a whole. But the shape is quite unfamiliar to us. For in effect, this is Christus Victor theory turned inside out. Just as Ransom had his understanding of the universe turned rather oddly inside out, so with the Atonement. For rather than being held captive in enemy territory, in these books, we refugees find ourselves for the first time in land occupied by the rightful king, and we're safe from all conflict, and the battles and rumors of wars are far away, although maybe important to understand. So instead of us being kidnapped or being held hostage and we need to be rescued, we're now in a completely safe zone, Mars, completely immune from the threats of Satan, kind of looking off at a distance at those troubled lands in this other planet, trying to understand it. And it's not just a matter of distance. Everything is backward in the Christus Victor theory, and that proves to be really interesting to me. So ironically, because ransom was brought as a perverse or demonic ransom, he can now serve as a divine ransom, the bridge connecting the heavens, providing an entry point for the heavenly powers to thwart the bent one's schemes on earth. And that's the key to the third book, That Hideous Strength. Everything here hinges on the role of authority, which is central to discussions of this theory. The question is why God did not simply destroy Satan and his works, for Satan had sinned against God. So why not just wipe him out? Gregory of Nyssa's catechetical oration, that's in one of the books we read or should read. Anyway, he's basically just ripping Gregory of Nazianzus off. The question is, why God did not simply destroy Satan? Satan deserved it. Essentially, the answer throughout the history of the church seems to be a matter of loving authority and not just authority. It's rooted in law and justice and love. Just as God loves us and in doing so gives us some small relative authority within our sphere of influence, so God does the same with Satan. He acknowledges and upholds the always relative authority of his other creatures, including the angels, and thus the seventh law described in That Hideous Strength, which we can't go into right now. Ransom provides the bridge between the heavens so that the angelic powers of the other planets can have influence on earth without simply violating the bent one's authority. In other words, God always acts according to his own rules, and his rules are set up not merely for himself, but for us, to give us room to have authority and have influence, and he will always follow those rules. But as we've noted, though, this is the mere framework, the background to what Lewis is really doing. It just helps set the stage. Right. His cosmology. So Lewis's cosmology, at least that portrayed within the Ransom trilogy, was thoroughly Miltonian, in that it bridged the gap between the ancient and modern conceptions. Careless readers of Paradise Lost, Lewis writes, maybe it's good that the Morgenhausers read it as sophomores rather than as freshmen, I don't know. Careless readers of Paradise Lost, Lewis writes, sometimes fail to notice Milton's careful and sensitive use of world and earth, and thereby miss one of the greatest achievements of his visual imagination. Milton felt a strong need to express the new sort of space consciousness, this feeling of just endless space out there. But he also wanted to retain a good deal from the old walled and elegant cosmos, which is so much richer in plasticity and associations, and indeed in everything except one particular and romantic species of sublimity. His solution was to enclose his world, cosmos or mundus, in an opaque spherical shell. This is the whole cosmos. Everything in Dante is in a spherical shell, and it's hanging from the floor of his heaven by a single golden thread and surrounded with illimitable chaos. So as far as we think of space just being endless chaos and stuff, C.S. Lewis will say, yeah, okay, fair enough, that's right, but everything Dante wanted to say is also right, because within all that chaos is this sphere containing the cosmos held by a golden thread. He got all that from Milton. Now this might seem to be of relatively little consequence to any but Milton scholars, but the point's revolutionary, giving Lewis the conceptual resources for a synthesis of ancient and modern cosmologies. Since Copernicus, the universe has been understood as a vast and inherently shapeless thing. There is no meaningful reference standing as the center and therefore as the perimeter or any other point from which an overall shape or structure could be affirmed. It's just big and whatever it is. Our solar system wanders among a host of stars, suns, and other solar systems with no particular claim to significance. Now, of course, the early and medieval models were altogether different, and were saturated in that thinking in our reading. There's a quote from Lewis's discarded image. The central and spherical Earth is surrounded by a series of hollow and transparent globes, one above the other, and each, of course, larger than the one below. These are the spheres, or the heavens, or sometimes the elements. Fixed in each of these first 7 spheres is one luminous body, starting from the Earth, and the order is the Moon, Mercury, Venus, the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, the 7 planets. Beyond the sphere of Saturn is the stellatum, to which belong all those stars which we still call fixed, because their positions relative to one another are, unlike those of the planets, invariable. Beyond the stellatum, there's a sphere called the first movable, or the primum mobile. Now that's all old hat. Like you've covered all that in Dante and in Milton and in Plato and in Cicero. It's all there, right? Now, such a cosmos is interesting because it saturated the ancient world and its imagination with structure, order, symmetry, shape, which modern cosmology replaced with space, distance, infinity, and chaos. So the older cosmology was elegant, and it filled everything with a sense of reason and purpose and balance. It was like a well-decorated living room, right? Modern cosmology is just big and vast with no particular order, and I can't even come up with a good image for it because it's just orderless, and images need order. All right? But shape and order are just the beginning, for according to Pythagoras, who was followed by Plato and many others, this structured movement of the spheres was naturally accompanied by music and harmony. We find this poignantly expressed in Cicero's dream of Scipio. After describing the heavens, much as Lewis does, because Lewis got it from him, Scipio asks, "What is this sound, so strong and sweet, which fills my ears?" Well, that, Africanus replied, is the music of the spheres. They create it by their own motion as they rush upon their way. The intervals between them, although differing in length, are all measured according to a fixed scheme of proportions, and this arrangement produces a melodious blend of high and low notes from which emerges a varied harmony. For it cannot be that these vast movements should take place in silence, and nature has ordained that the spheres utter music. So what's that tremendous music? The planets whirling through space. And if things move, they make a sound. Now, it's worth noting there was some range of diversity on this matter. Aristotle, for instance, thought the whole idea was ridiculous. If things that big are moving that fast and making a sound that big, it would just shake the world to bits. Right? But what fun is that? Plato, more importantly for our purposes, therefore I agree with him, posited that up above on each of the rims of the circle stood a siren who accompanied its revolution, uttering a single sound, one single note. And the concord of the 8 notes produced a harmony, thus personalizing what had been a purely physical phenomenon in Pythagoras. So what had been math quickly became much more mystical or theological, with a siren on each planet singing its song, making a beautiful harmony as opposed to what we encounter in the Odyssey. So Lewis adopted a Miltonian approach to this tension, standing with a foot in each cosmology while heavily favoring the ancient and the medieval view. With regard to the modern view, he adopted a heliocentric model of the solar system, allowing for the space and scope of the modern universe. But that's about as far as he goes in that direction, placing all his emphasis upon the order, the beauty, the structure, and the harmony of the solar system, just as Milton did with his golden thread, and the way that the planets play a powerful role in influencing affairs upon Earth. And one of the most important implications of his cosmological thesis was a problem which the ancients never would have fathomed: the silence of our planet. More on that shortly. The cosmos and the angels. Now, cosmology is just the beginning, for even as we saw with Plato, the hierarchy of the spheres could not long be kept distinct from the hierarchies of the intelligences, whether they be gods, sirens, angels, whatever. Note, for instance, Thomas's survey of the relevant opinions as to whether the planets were living beings. This is systematic theology, right? Are the planets living beings? Well, why wouldn't a theologian ask that question? All right, so this is Thomas. Philosophers have differed on this question. Anaxagoras, for instance, as Augustine mentions, so there's Augustine in on this too, was condemned by the Athenians for teaching that the sun was a fiery mass of stone and neither a god nor a living being. On the other hand, the Platonists held that the heavenly bodies have life, nor was there less diversity of opinion among the doctors of the church. It was the belief of Origen and Jerome that these bodies were alive, and the latter seems to explain it in that sense the words from Ecclesiastes, "The spirit goes forward, surveying all places round about." Not sure how that proves that, but that's what Jerome thought. But Basil and John the Damascus maintained that the heavenly bodies are inanimate. Augustine leaves the matter in doubt without committing himself to either theory, though he goes so far as to say that if the heavenly bodies are really living beings, their souls must be akin to the angelic nature. So that's Thomas surveying this vast swath of theology and philosophy, and this question matters to him. Lewis, it seems, took the view that the planets themselves were inanimate, but that each planet had a governing power. Each sphere, or something resident in each sphere, is a conscious and intellectual being. These lofty creatures are called intelligences. The relation between the intelligence of a sphere and the sphere itself, as a physical object, was variously conceived. And this is precisely what we find in Dante, who writes that as from the blacksmith springs the hammer's art, so power and motion in each holy wheel breathe from the blessed beings that move the sphere. So too that heaven so many lights adorn. From the deep mind that turns it, it receives its image and makes itself the seal. But the important bit in there is that it's beings that move each sphere. So there's a being there, and the sphere itself is inanimate. Though hesitant to refer to these intelligences as angels, it seems clear that this is precisely what Lewis meets in the Oyarsa of Malacandra, the same being true of the bent one, which rules our own Theocandra. That would be our resident intelligence, the governing being of our planet, Satan. And in that hideous strength, Lewis refers to the first 5 excellent natures and the Gloria which they perpetually sing, that being the 5 intelligences of the lowest planets and the Gloria they're eternally singing to God. Lewis then posits not merely an ordered and harmonic cosmos or solar system, but one filled with intelligent spiritual beings, some of which hold power or sway over whole planets, without being quite said to reside in them. Though Lewis does not connect these intelligences to Plato's sirens, that's from the Republic, it's a short step to bind together the angelology and cosmology of this view with the Pythagorean music of the spheres in the Gloria that Lewis says they perpetually sing. Just pulling all sorts of stuff together here through Lewis. We see something akin to this in the Great Divorce, where the planet itself, the nature or arc nature of that land, rejoiced to have been once more ridden and therefore consummated in the person of the horse. Just a snippet from a whole story. But this soul becomes converted and transformed, and in the process becomes a horse where it had been this nasty little lizard. And as it rides off towards heaven, the whole earth starts singing in joy at having been ridden and therefore consummated. Anyway, more than we can do with that. Okay, this may have been behind Dante's synthesis of the spheres, angelic hierarchies, and the song proper to each of the spheres. Dante may have replaced Plato's sirens with angelic beings, which sang not a single note, but a whole song unique to that sphere or planet. Anyway, that's what might have been going on in Dante. Ransom first hears this song by understanding the Malacandrian song, the song of the residents of Mars. Now first he saw that its rhythms of this music were based on a different blood than ours, on a heart that beat more quickly and a fiercer internal heat. A sense of great masses moving at visionary speeds, of giants dancing, of eternal sorrows eternally consoled, of he knew not what, and yet what he had always known awoke in him with the very first bars of the deep-mouthed dirge, and bowed down his spirit as if the gate of heaven had opened before him. And that's his first introduction to this music, through the music of this people, but he's beginning to hear and see something different. For this is precisely what was happening. Ransom, through Malacandrian song, was beginning to hear the music he had always known but never heard, the music of the spheres, the central music in every pure experience which had always just evaded memory. The great exception, our planet. Now, the great exception to all this is Theocandra, our own planet. While the ancients well knew that the earth was a sphere, it does not follow that it was a planet. for the planets were the moving stars, the wanderers. The earth, on the other hand, was still. Plato had it winding around the axis that stretches through the universe. Along these lines, Cicero writes, "There below the moon is the earth, the ninth and the lowest of the spheres, lying at the center of the universe. The earth remains fixed and without motion. All things are drawn to it because the natural force of gravity pulls them down." Dante, looking down upon the earth from the heavens, sees this globe so small I smiled at how it appeared. Cute. "And I approved the counsel best of all that scorns it. But to think of something higher truly bespeaks a spirit brave and tall." Just a scornful little ball of dense stuff down at the bottom of the universe. Shortly thereafter, Dante speaks of the other planets, shifting their places, each in its size and its velocity, in contrast to the little winnowing floor, our planet Earth. So for the ancients and the medievals, the earth was silent, but for a very simple reason. It was still. That is to say, it did not wander through the heavens, making a sound in keeping with its motion. Fixed, still, heavy, it lay at the weighty center of the universe, in contrast to the eternally and perfectly moving heavens. The earth was silent, motionless, best scorned for other things, but that wasn't a problem. It was just silent because it was still, and things that aren't moving don't make a sound. Lewis, through his Miltonian cosmological synthesis, provides an altogether different reason for the silence of the earth. In his heliocentric cosmology, the earth becomes a planet, a wanderer, but it remains silent. Thocandra, the silent world or planet, something unfathomable to the ancient and medieval mind. Why then is our planet silent? Because Lewis attributes the music of the spheres not merely to the physical movement, but to the muse, the siren, the angel that governs and moves that planet. Our planet is silent not because it doesn't move, but because its governing intelligence is silent, has broken communion with God in the heavens. We are a planet under siege whose governing power is Satan refusing to hold communion with God and His purposes, and so will not participate in the song. Or if he does, it's a din of chaos, the city of Dis sending out its music, false music, into the heavens. But God won't stand for that. The planet has been barred and protected both for heaven's sake and for earth's sake, so its broken communion no longer affects the song of the heavens. As Shippey puts it, a scholar that writes on this stuff, the presiding intelligence of earth is Satan. That is why the earth is the silent planet, cut off from the everlasting harmony of the planetary and stellar spheres. The universe's cold dregs, its inhabitants a prey to demonic temptation and delusion, in a word, fallen, though not beyond salvation. And the key to this vision lies in the intelligence or governing angel of earth, the bent one. Once, this is Oyarsa speaking from Mars, once we knew the Oyarsa of your world. He was brighter than I, says Oyarsa. And then we did not call it Thocandra. It was the longest of all stories and the bitterest. He became bent. That was before any life came on your world. Those were the bent years of which we still speak in the heavens, when he was not yet bound to Thocandra, but free like us. It was in his mind to spoil other worlds beside his own. We did not leave him at large for long. There was great war, and we drove him back out of the heavens and bound him in the air of his own world, as Maladil taught us. There, doubtless, he lies to this hour, and we know no more of that planet. It is silent. And this brings us full circle. For we're back on the soil of Christus Victor, where the dominant concern is to account for Christ's defeat of Satan, but the picture has radically changed. For the stage has been turned inside out, and we view Satan's fallen tyranny not from the perspective of the earth and its inhabitants, but from Mars and later Venus. And from this vantage point, Satan has been quarantined as a matter of cosmological precaution for the other planets. The Church's teaching, implied in several Dominical, Pauline, and Johannine utterances, that man was not the first creature to rebel against the Creator, but that some older and mightier being long since became apostate and is now the emperor of darkness and significantly the Lord of this world, still stands true. But its implications have been given a cosmic rather than merely earthly scope, and all that is going on in C.S. Lewis's Cosmology. So now we have all the key components, all the ingredients are out on the counter. All right? We have our dough and the raisins and the cinnamon and the sugar. Let's make some cinnamon rolls, right? Okay, so we have the key components in place to appreciate Lewis's brilliant development of Christ's atoning work. The basic scheme is that of Christus Victor defeating Satan, such as he developed in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, with the problem firmly focused on Satan and the havoc he unleashes in creation, but the stage has been expanded to a cosmic scope rather than the little itty-bitty earthly scope. Okay? The plight in question is not merely that of traitors such as Edmund, the plight is that of the heavens themselves. For while the angels and beings of other planets may not have fallen, and Satan has been quarantined within the confines of this earthly atmosphere to protect those planets from further harm, the consequences of his rebellion nonetheless touch upon the heavens as a whole. For what to the ancients and medievals was a simple and unproblematic given, the silence of the earth, has now become a cosmic problem, the silence of our planet. So the heavens themselves are suffering a problem. The problem isn't their own problem, it's that their work is not complete and cannot be complete because one of its members is in rebellion. So they long for the fulfillment of everyone playing their proper role. Like even if you're doing, if you're, to use a basketball image, even if you're doing everything that you ought to be doing as a basketball player, shutting down the person you're guarding, scoring points, grabbing rebounds, doing everything you need to do, if one of the players on your team is either daydreaming or trying to sabotage your team suffers even though you are not in sin. That's the plight of the cosmos. Why did God become man? In part to overthrow the rule of Satan, bringing deliverance to the captives. But the solution is as big or bigger than the problem itself. After all, where sin abounds, grace abounds even more. So once more, why did God become man? Why did God become man? He became man to end the siege of Thulkandra, overthrow the rule of Satan, that through his lordship over the planet Earth, it might once more rejoin the heavenly song, bringing completion and perfection to the music of the spheres. I'll say that once more because I like it. He became man to end the siege of Thulkandra, overthrow the rule of Satan, that through his lordship over the planet Earth, it might once more rejoin the heavenly song, bringing completion and perfection to the music of the spheres. God became man that the heavens might once more, or even perhaps for the first time, perfectly proclaim the glory of God by means of that heavenly song. The heavens do indeed proclaim the glory of the Lord, Psalm 19. But through the work of Christ, our own planet now joins that song that the heavens are always doing, and through that completion is brought about. We see the fullest expression of this line of thought in Lewis's poem, The Turn of the Tide, in which he tells of a wave of silence beginning with the breathless air over Bethlehem, sweeping around the earth and out into the heavens. I'll read you just a little bit of it. From the earth, the signal, the warning went out. Away beyond the air, her neighbors were aware of change. They were troubled with doubt. So what was this end? So this is me now. The Osiarchs divine, the great galactic lords, whispered, "Is this perhaps the last of our story and the glories of our crown? The entropy worked out?" No. And now for Lewis's poem again. Like a stab at that moment over crab and bowman, over maiden and lion constellations, came the shock of returning life. The start, the burning pang of heart, setting galaxies to tingle and rock. The lords dared to breathe, and swords went into sheaths. A rustling, a relaxing began. With rumor and noise of the resuming of joys, along the nerves of the universe it ran. Then pulsing into space with delicate dulcet pace came a music infinitely small, but clear, and it swelled and drew nearer till it held all worlds with the sharpness of its call. And now divinely deep, ever louder with a leap and a quiver of inebriating sound. The vibrant dithyramb shook Libra and Ram. The brains of Aquarius spun around, such a note as neither throne nor potentate had known since the Word created the abyss. But this time it was changed in a mystery, estranged, a paradox, an ambiguous bliss. Heaven danced to it and burned, such answer was returned to the hush, the favette, the fear that earth had sent out. Revel, mirth, and shout, descended to her, sphere below sphere, till Saturn laughed and lost his latter age's frost, and his beard Niagara-like unfroze. Saturn is cold and frozen over with ice in this mythology. The monsters in the sun rejoiced. The inconstant one, the unwedded moon, forgot her woes. A shiver of rebirth and deliverance round the earth went gliding, her bonds were released. Of course, that's just the beginning. The first onslaught, for as with Milton's Paradise Regained, this is but a prelude to the second, greater, colder wave of silence which will sweep the heavens on Good Friday. An even greater shock of triumphant resurrected life which will resound and echo through the heavens, filling them with a song to this point unheard, unguessed, a song which will swell unending through the heavens, leading them in their glorious dance. Not only will the earth be delivered, released from her bonds, she will be in her glory, radiant before her Lord, crowning the heavenly dance, fulfilling the music of the spheres. Now, why bother asking whether Christ's death impacted aliens, planets, and supposed heavenly music? After all, isn't the death and resurrection of Jesus primarily about reconciling men and women to God? Yeah. But one of the great and unique things about Jewish and Christian faith is their gusto, this is a quote from Lewis, their gusto, or even gratitude, in the way it embraces things that are of no use to man, of creatures useless or hurtful or wholly irrelevant to man. For these are the creatures of God, the creator and sustainer of all, and are therefore our fellow dependents. And mention of all equally redounds to his praise. So this is no mere matter of creation or the Old Testament alone. The destiny which Christianity promises to man clearly involves a redemption or remaking of nature, which could not stop at us or even our planet. We are told that the whole of creation is in travail, according to Paul, and that man's rebirth will be the signal for hers, for the renewal and the rebirth of all creation. In short, redemption, just as with creation, is a matter that includes but far transcends our own being and concerns, stretching to encompass the whole work of God's creation and therefore the cosmos as a whole. So we have to dwell on these things, even if we can't say a whole lot about it with confidence, because Scripture is giving all these footholds, handholds. There are rooms in this castle demanding decor and decoration and parties, even if we don't spend very much time in those rooms. Lewis's thesis concerning the atonement and the music of the spheres is thus partly a matter of re-enchanting the cosmos, converting space back into the heavens, refashioning the whole of the universe into God's good creation. But doing this requires so much more than a doctrine of creation, as though this could or should stand independently of the work of Christ. Lewis's genius lies partly in his commitment to accomplishing this grand synthetic task by means of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, binding the periphery to the center. But from this center, from the atoning work of Jesus Christ, Lewis works outward, filling the whole universe with meaning, or rather, witnessing to the meaning with which God in His wisdom has filled creation. And it is precisely in this wisdom of God that Lewis helps us delight, reminding us that it might turn out that the redemption of other species differed from ours by working through ours. There's a hint of something like this in St. Paul in Romans 8, when he says that the whole of creation is longing and waiting to be delivered from some kind of slavery, and that the deliverance will occur only when we Christians fully enter our sonship to God and exercise our glorious liberty. Why couldn't that be true of aliens, Lewis is asking. Lewis proceeds to speculate that even though Paul is probably thinking only of our own earth, it's possible, it's not necessary, to give his words a cosmic meaning. A meaning as cosmic as creation was in the first place in Genesis 1 through 3. And this possibility is profoundly important to us, for it vindicates the doctrine of creation, casting us up into the sphere of God's own cosmos, His bigger concerns. But it does that through Christ's work. And we do well to dwell on the breadth and the scope of these concerns. As our earth is to all the stars, so doubtless are we men and our concerns to all creation. As all the stars are to space itself, so are all the creatures, all thrones and powers, and the mightiest of the created gods, to the abyss of the self-existing God, Lewis writes. But lest we find ourselves lost in that immensity, Lewis immediately affirms the identity of this self-existent being, who is to us Father and Redeemer and indwelling Comforter. Why dwell on the cosmic work of Christ? Because it expands our horizons of our understanding and worship of God as Creator, giving us a far greater framework for knowledge and action, without the danger that mere cosmic speculation might have of making us insignificant before the scope of the universe. In other words, things can get really big without any danger of you getting too small. For our introduction to this scope is precisely through the work of the incarnate Maker, who for us, as for creation as a whole, and for our salvation and the perfection of the interplanetary song, became man. And this union between God and nature in the person of Christ admits no divorce. He will not go out of nature again, and she must be glorified in all the ways which this miraculous union demands. And among these glories is that sacred music of the spheres, the joyful and triumphant song of the heavens in praise of their Maker and Redeemer. Now, one last concluding paragraph that I haven't written yet. Matt Jensen scribbled, "Do you believe this stuff?" I think it's a really good question. I can't imagine a pastor reading this and preaching it on a Sunday. But you know your history of thought well enough to know that there have been pastors in the history of the church who, if they read this, would have preached it. All right? So I don't think I would preach it. But there are pastors that would have preached it, and they would have done it with good conscience, and people would have converted and bowed the knee to the Lord and Maker of heaven and earth. Okay? So where are we left? This is something that people would have preached. We can't quite preach it. I think what Lewis is doing, and what we're called to do, among other things, is do joyful, creative, theological exploration of the nooks and crannies, which don't allow us to say, this is the truth and proclaim it, but the attempt and the calling to fill the void of saying, this might be. Something is demanded right here. There's a gap that's longing to be filled. This could fill it. We shouldn't proclaim it as dogmatic truth and demand that people believe it and sign a statement of faith. But to leave all those gaps unfilled is to leave the playground untouched. Right? So this is sort of a creative theological exploration at its best in C.S. Lewis, me attempting to try to give voice to him. And in doing that, it's saying theology is so much more than a defensive maneuver against bad guys, so much more than an attempt to just say, organize what Scripture is saying about the most important things, or even give voice to contemporary concerns and address them from the standpoint of Scripture and the church. It's a calling to be joyfully creative, exploring nooks and crannies that God has created and revealed to us in these little snippets and whispers in Psalm 19 and Romans 8, and little bits and pieces about God reconciling things in heaven and on earth and below the earth. What does it mean to reconcile things in heaven? Is this the answer? I hope so. Am I going to bet on it and stake my faith on it? No. But I think what Lewis offers us is a compelling example of a responsible answering of that question just out of joy and for the fun of it, because why would we want to do anything else? All right. Lord bless you and keep you.
We hope you enjoyed this message. Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Learn more at biola.edu.